The year was 1845, and I was a British soldier posted out in New Zealand, trying to make sense of a land that felt like the edge of the world. I once wrote a letter home about something I saw there, something that shook me so deeply the letter never ended up leaving my pack. In it, I tried to describe the moment I watched a Maori warrior handle a weapon that put a cold sickness in the stomach of every man in my regiment. It wasn't the appearance of the thing that rattled us. Honestly, it looked simple enough at first. It was the knowledge of what that weapon could do to a man's body in less than 3 seconds. They called it a taiaha, and what I witnessed that day stayed with me, creeping into my thoughts for the rest of my life. I'm going to tell you about what I came to believe was the most terrifying hand-to-hand weapon ever made. This was a weapon so brutally effective that European commanders tried to have it outlawed under the so-called rules of civilized warfare. Could beat a sword, smash through armor, and end a man's life in ways that modern combat instructors still shake their heads at. At first glance, though, the taiaha doesn't look threatening at all. It's basically a 6-foot staff carved from hard, seasoned wood. One end tapers into a sharp point like a spear, while the opposite end widens into a flat blade, almost like a paddle. To our European eyes, it seemed crude, primitive even, especially when held up against polished steel sabers and bayonets. But the moment we saw it used, everything we thought we knew about primitive disappeared. That's when we met Tamati. He was just 16, though you wouldn't have known it from the way he moved, and he'd been training with that taiaha practically since he first learned to stand. For the past decade, long before the sunrise each morning, Tamati had been out on the practice grounds doing something that would have wiped out most professional athletes in minutes. He'd begin by whipping the taiaha through the air so fast the whole thing blurred like a spinning wheel. And none of it was for show. Every swing was carving muscle memory into his bones. Muscle memory for strikes that came quicker than the eye could follow, quicker than any opponent could hope to react, quicker even than the thought of danger itself. What I didn't know then was that the taiaha wasn't just one weapon, it was more like 7 weapons combined. The pointed end worked as a spear, the flat end operated as a club, and the entire length served as a staff for blocking, sweeping, and redirecting force. And that still didn't cover half of it. Every ridge, every angle, every contour of the taiaha had its own purpose, a unique technique designed to injure or kill. A warrior who truly mastered it could attack from any stance, any angle, and at any distance within their reach. When you stood across from someone like that, there wasn't a single spot you could stand that felt safe. Our European soldiers might spend a few months, maybe a year if they were committed, learning their sword drills. Maori warriors trained with the taiaha for their entire lives. By the time they stepped into their first real fight, they had thrown more than 1 million practice strikes. Their bodies didn't need to think. They simply acted. Fluid, precise, deadly. But the true brilliance of the taiaha wasn't in the wood itself. It was in the way it reshaped the person holding it. Tamati learned young that the taiaha couldn't just sit in his hands like a tool. It had to merge with him, becoming as natural to his movements as his own heartbeat, woven right into his nerves. Master warriors could practically sense the world through that weapon. The moment the taiaha touched anything, an opponent's blade, a piece of armor, or even flesh, the feeling shot back through their hands faster than a person could form a thought. Because of that, in the confusion of real battle, while we British soldiers were still trying to figure out our next move, the Maori fighters were already 3 steps ahead without even seeming to think about it. Their training had erased the delay between deciding and doing. They operated at a speed the conscious mind usually can't reach. I remember watching the man who inspired that letter, Rewi was his name, take on 3 of our soldiers at once, each of them armed with a sword. These weren't rookies either. They were trained, seasoned, and sure of themselves. And still, the whole fight was over in 7 seconds. Rewi didn't just beat them. He broke down their defenses piece by piece with such sharp precision that the rest of us standing there couldn't even make sense of what had happened. One instant, the British soldiers were moving forward. In the next heartbeat, all 3 were on the ground, disarmed, disabled, and shocked, without managing a single full swing of their blades. The secret of the taiaha wasn't mystical. It was physics. Our European weapons were built around raw strength. The taiaha was built around speed and leverage. In the hands of a master, The weapon could unleash incredible power simply by using momentum and razor-sharp angles that multiplied the force far beyond what the warrior's muscles alone could produce. A hit from the flat side could shatter bones even through armor. A thrust from the pointed end could slip through leather and skin like it was nothing. And the sweeping motions, those could knock down more than one man before anyone even realized what was happening. But what made the taiaha truly terrifying was how adaptable it was. European soldiers were trained for particular situations, tight-line formations, single duels, cavalry encounters. But the taiaha wasn't built for one tidy style of fighting. It thrived in pure, unpredictable mayhem. Whether you were backed into a cramped corner, standing out in the open, weaving through trees, facing one man or an entire group, the weapon and the warrior shifted instantly to match whatever the moment demanded. Their training covered every possible scenario, so nothing caught them off guard. And the psychological effect on us was brutal. The first time European troops faced warriors wielding taiaha, they encountered something unfamiliar, a sense of total, unavoidable defeat. You could see it in the rhythm of the warrior's movement, in the blur of that wooden blade, and in the unshakable confidence that radiated from them. Every part of their stance told you the same thing: you don't stand a chance. That mental pressure wasn't an accident. It was part of the training. Taiaha warriors learned how to project absolute control. Even the haka before battle wasn't just for show. It was a display of discipline, unity, and lethal readiness that dug into your nerves before the fighting even started. When European commanders later tried to make sense of how their troops kept losing to Maori forces who were often outnumbered, they always circled back to the same conclusion: the taiaha. Reports labeled it uncivilized and barbaric, which, in military language, basically meant, we have no idea how to defend ourselves against this. Some European commanders were so rattled by the taiaha that they actually tried to argue it should be outlawed under the rules of civilized warfare, claiming it was simply too lethal. Just imagine that for a moment. European armies loaded with rifles, cannons, and steel blades wanted to ban a wooden staff because they couldn't stand up to it in a close-quarters fight. But what really shook those forces wasn't the weapon itself. It was the realization that the level of training required to master the taiaha was completely out of reach for the average European soldier. Even if they seized a few of the weapons or studied how Maori warriors used them, they couldn't come close to the skill needed to make that knowledge matter. Because in the end, the true power of the taiaha wasn't carved into the wood. It was built into the warrior. These men had spent decades honing their craft, beginning when they were still children. A true master wasn't just swinging a stick. He was operating on a level of mind and body unity that our military training systems never even approached. Even today, modern martial arts experts continue to uncover techniques that were second nature to Maori fighters generations ago. There were movements designed to generate enormous force with almost no visible wind-up. Strike sequences built to exploit the tiny gaps in human reaction time. Defensive stances that didn't just block, they set up immediate, crushing counterattacks. To me, the taiaha represents something extraordinary about human potential. With disciplined training that starts young and continues over a lifetime, the body and mind can develop abilities that seem superhuman to anyone who hasn't walked that path. These days, taiaha training is making a comeback. Not just as a way to preserve culture, though that part matters a great deal, but because athletes, fighters, and even military groups are realizing that ancient Maori warriors figured out solutions to hand-to-hand combat problems that modern systems still haven't fully solved. The core ideas behind mastering the taiaha: integrating every muscle group, valuing speed over brute strength, drilling until your actions become instinct, preparing for every situation until nothing surprises you. Those principles are now showing up everywhere, from high-level sports science to elite special forces programs. That British soldier me ended that old letter with one simple line, a line my commanding officers brushed aside but historians now treat as fact. We aren't fighting primitive people. We're facing masters of a martial system we don't understand and can't match. The taiaha was more than a weapon. It was evidence that indigenous combat traditions had evolved techniques every bit as advanced, maybe even more advanced, than anything Europe had produced. The warriors who wielded it carried centuries of accumulated knowledge, layered training, and cultural understanding that our doctrines couldn't even begin to grasp. And here's what truly unsettled European forces. The taiaha wasn't the only thing Maori warriors were good at. It was just one part of a complete fighting system that covered every distance, every scenario, every type of opponent. A system so well developed that even today we're still learning from it. That so-called deadly Maori weapon didn't terrify Europeans because it was strange or foreign. It terrified them because it was refined to near perfection by countless generations of people who understood something modern civilization had forgotten. That when a person dedicates their whole life to mastering a skill, when they fuse their body and weapon into a single, seamless unit, when they erase the gap between a thought and the action that follows, well, at that point any weapon becomes unstoppable. And that, to me, is the real lesson of the taiaha. It wasn't just an unusual object from a distant land. It was a demonstration of what human beings are capable of when they're given the right training, supported by the right culture, and granted enough time to perfect their craft. The weapon that frightened European soldiers wasn't magical, mysterious, or supernatural. It was made of wood, sharpened skill, and the unshakable confidence that comes from knowing, absolutely knowing, that you have trained longer and harder than anyone who dares stand in front of you. And that certainty, that was the true force behind the taiaha's power.